Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
I am not a Lizardmen player, but I do play against them occasionally.
Yes, but everybody loves them. So yes, let's dive right in. We are continuing our series. We said we were going to go through them all. It's taking a while with 17 factions, but we are finally on to Lizardmen now, talking about how the 1.51 updated affected them, or at least what are the biggest impacts we see for Lizardmen with this update.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through that and continue our list. So Evan, take it away. Where do we start with, sir?
So I don't think how you could really start talking about this without just bringing up how Saurus have got like a massive glow up. I've always loved the
Okay,
Saurus in general as just being like I would really like in terms of the Lizardmen, just the Saurus models. They've got the big shield. They just have a big ass club, and then the
they're
stats. You got
cool.
this guy who's an infantryman, but he's got 2 attacks each, and you just have so many of these just walloping attacks from these dudes.
Hmm.
Amazing. And then we have the rules of, oh, so now you get to have a parry save, and then we jump our Saurus up to a 3+ armor save, and they can now swing in two
Huge.
ranks. So when they have their incredibly terrible initiative of, I think it's 1. I think they're initiative 1, Mike.
They've always been slow. That's part of the lore. Yeah.
So they're initiative 1 or something, and if you just kill the front rank, well, guess what? Actually, you didn't. You killed the second rank, and now the front rank hits you with 2 attacks each. That's
Hmm.
great. I think that's perfectly fine. They're almost ogres, to be honest. Like if you compare a
Yeah.
Saurus warrior to an ogre bull, they're pretty similar, except
But
for those
it's not
points,
just
right?
fine to your point. Like,
Yeah,
so there's so few unit models in the game that have two attacks.
yeah,
Certainly infantry, right? There's like chosen chaos warriors, and there's a few things out there. Now there are a good number of models that could take two hand weapons, but those you're usually very vulnerable, and so it's not quite the same as an elite brick of infantry that has two attacks, that has good hits hard with good strength, good weapon skill. There's just not a lot of them, and so suddenly now, like, having two attacks was good before, but having two attacks now with two ranks, where the fighting rank you're removing, pulling the casualties from the back rank, so you still get to maximize those two attacks because you're not pulling the casualties from your front rank. That's huge. That is huge. And it's still, we're still not seeing a lot of the elite like chosen chaos warrior infantry in the game, just because they cost so many points. So
yeah.
Sauruses actually are one of the units that benefits the most from the 1.5 infantry glow up than almost any other infantry in the game. Not just because of the armor save, not because of the combat resolution, but also because they are a fairly cost-effective infantry unit with two attacks. That's a huge, absolutely huge glow up.
Yeah, and so if you used to bring, a 5x4 man block of 20 SARs for like 300 points, or how much they cost, and you went, these guys never do anything, this is awful. Well, guess what? You can take the exact same unit now, and they actually do some stuff. Like that's so great. I'm
They
really
do a
excited
lot.
about the fact that now you get to do some stuff with this unit, and it's like that's what the army is kind of supposed to look like on the table, right? Is to have some SARs in the middle and some skinks running around them in circles. I really think that in the pre 1.5 world, the armies very often, even if you're not even trying to be all that competitive, you're just trying to have a decent game. The armies were a lot of, okay, I've got 4 monsters, I've got a big character over here, and I've got some skirmishers, and that's it. And it's like, it doesn't really look like an army. And now in 1.5, it actually kind of starts looking like an army. If only they, oh god, I'm going to do the thing. If only the Sky Lanterns didn't just nuke these kind of units from orbit with their napalm strikes that they can do. It would make the game a little more infantry focused, but I think that that's only one particular unit problem, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's really specific to Cathay, and that's
yeah,
really not a focus because that's a challenge for all the armies. And I do believe that GW will address that at some point and such. So, but
sure, yeah,
besides that, and again, you're not playing versus Cathay every single round either anyway. So
hopefully, yeah.
that's a different conversation entirely.
Yeah, so Saurus, a lot of strength 4 AP1 attacks, especially against a lot of other infantry in the game that might also be sitting there, is great. I think that's and you know what? You actually get to roll a lot of those dice yourself. And when you have a unit that gets to roll 20 dice, it really helps cut down on the variability. If you have a monster with 4 attacks, you could just miss all your attacks and like, well,
Oh yeah,
crud, and then you could actually
all the
just be
time.
really screwed. And if your unit has maybe some lower quality attacks, but they get to have 20 of them, it
Hmm.
really cuts down on the variability of what's going to happen in that combat. And you can have a unit you can rely upon to actually do something. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's not even to begin to talk about the fact that you've got Saurus, but you also have Temple Guard, who've got the better weapon
Hmm.
skill. They can bring a halberd. And you know what? Heavy armor, halberd, and shield is one of the best loadouts in the game right now because if you charge, you can use your halberd in 2 hands and get AP2 on your attacks, which is amazing. Or you can just use your hand weapon, which is still the 2 attack strength 4, right? And have a 3+ save when you get charged. And usually, if you're getting charged, it's because the thing charging you is, actually sees some advantage in doing that. So you want to use your shield and parry save. But if you're charging, you're probably doing it because you're trying to go and do some actual damage or cut somebody up. So being able to have both options, halberd or hand weapon shield, is really cool. I'm really happy that they changed it so you can choose which weapon you're using in each combat. That's awesome. There was no reason to not do that before, I think. And so,
Absolutely.
yes, you've got all this really great heavy infantry that just sits there and just absolutely grinds the crap out of people, and I love that.
And just with point to your point there is that again, a lot of infantry in the game, not all, but a lot of them have like you have to choose. I'm choosing a hand weapon and a shield, or I'm choosing a halberd, or I'm choosing a great
Yeah,
weapon. You don't get both. They are one of the units that can take both, and
yeah.
so you can really maximize that advantage of you are getting to choose each round of combat which is the loadout you want to use. I love that rule so much. It just makes it so much more compelling, and it creates interesting choice, strategic, interesting choice, which is great for the game.
So next up, we've got again. I'm going to praise High Magic because it's just my own one of my personal favorites. It's really great for
It's
giving
really
you
good.
buffing up your own units. There's very few hexes or things that you're trying to target the enemy with. The only hex in High Magic is Drain Magic, which is one of the best hexes in the game because it doesn't actually have to cast against somebody else's magic resistance or anything. You just cast it, and everyone within 24 inches have to increase the casting value of their spells by 2. Which,
Yep.
when you have an army that really doesn't like getting magic missile to death, that's really, really useful. It's almost like giving your whole army MR2, right? Not
Hmm.
exactly, but again, as long as it's hard for the person to stop, then that's great, and it just stays active. So you can do that. Fiery Convocation is an amazing spell for it. Basically, again, exactly how I said that the Cathay Sky Lantern can nuke infantry. Well, Fiery Convocation was doing that since the game started, and you just drop a large template, strength 4, AP2 on top of people, and it removes a lot of guys. So that's always fun. Fury of Cain, when you actually have some halfway decent melee troops like your Cloveland Riders, and you just give them an extra attack for the rider and the mount, that's always great. So again, I just think that high magic, especially in something like the Lizardmen, can be really useful. If you have it on the Slann and you join the unit right, you can make your unit of toughness 4, 2 attack each guy's ethereal, and look, even if it's a 10 plus to cast, okay, you still can cast it. You don't have the magic resistance from the enemy, making it almost impossible. So, like, for example, I'm just spitting the spitball on this. Magic Barrage is also a 10 to cast, but if the person you're casting on has magic resistance, it's an impossible to cast because you just can't roll that high. It's just not going to happen. Whereas, Walk Between Worlds is a 10 to cast, but it's not impossible. You don't have the MR trying to shut you down. A lot of times people don't even have a Dispeller anymore, so as long as you just roll decently, you're basically invulnerable half the time, right? Think about it that way. You don't have to cast it every turn. You can just cast it every other turn. So I really like that. If I was playing Lizardmen, my first thing I would do would be a Temple Guard, High Magic Slann, sticks them in there, and then I would start going on to the next things I'm going to bring up here, which is, Skinks are still an incredibly cheap unit, but Poison got changed to be basically half as good as it used to be, and that is
Hmm.
really, really punishing for things like the Skinks. They really hate them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not as good as it used to be. 100%, no one can argue that. And I think, but it's still, depending on your unit, still very effective. I think the units that suffered the most from this is the big bricks that people were taking up. I'm going to take a huge brick of unit of poisoned, whether it's a banner or something else, and I have a whole bunch of ranks. Therefore, but before with the previous FAQ, they said you may fire all the ranks at a large target. So they're like, cool. I now have my solution to kill dragons or big gnarly large target things because I'm going to fire 20, 30 poison shots at them, right? And it was actually very effective. Not necessarily good for the game, but it was that was a way that they could handle the meta dragon dominance that was occurring so much. Of course, that has shifted in many ways now. But for skinks, right, it's also different because they're often skirmishing, right? So you will still often get almost all of the unit's attacks when shooting with your skink and poison. But still, you're absolutely right. Just 6 auto wounding is very, very powerful versus needing, getting a +2 to the wound roll. Now, +2 to the wound roll, still, a lot of the times it means your 6s to wound with the weapon versus the big, tough Gribbly is now going to be a 4+ to wound. So it means you're getting about, on average, you will get half because of 50-50
Yeah,
chance
half,
of
yeah.
what those 6s were before. So it is definitely nerfed, but I'm saying it's not impacting the Lizardmen skirmishing poison skinks as much as it is affecting those volley
Wood
fire
elves.
wood elves or orcs and goblins or other units that were using poison banners. So still, it is good, still is effective. I still think we're going to see it a lot with Lizardmen armies, but it is in truth half as effective as it was before.
Yeah, and The ironic part is the Skinks can also parry, so the Skinks in combat have a 4-up armor save, so that's kind of funny.
Mhm.
And they're still a reuseful unit. It's just that instead of it being like, oh god, do I have to take these Saurus, and I would much rather take 700 points of Skinks, now it's a little bit more 50-50, and I think that that's a great place for the game to actually be. Saying,
Absolutely.
take 300 points of Saurus and Temple Guard, for example, and then also take 200, 300 points of some Skinks that, give you more skirmishing, slow enemies down. The thing I like to do with skirmishers is put them in front of the enemy so that if they get charged, they can flee, and if they get caught, the enemy does not overrun when that happens, and they get kind of stuck in a bad position. And for a 50-point unit of 10 Skinks, that's a really useful thing for them to do.
Absolutely. But remember, you want to hold those objectives, right? So there's a great reason, not just because they're more durable and more effective now, but also for holding objectives. Skinks are not your best friend with holding objectives. You're having a big Brachiosaurus is going to be a lot more effective at that.
Okay, next thing up is Lizardmen have a bunch of bound spells coming from things like the Bastiladons and the Ancient Stegodons and the War Engines that they've got. And all of these have power levels of like 2 and 3, and they did not get nerfed by any kind of update because they're a legacy faction, so nobody cares to do that. And so I actually think that one of the best things you can do, or one of the most interesting things you can do with the Lizardmen right now, is to bring all these Bastiladons and just have like a ton of just magic missile bound spell stuff. And just be like, I've got all these bound spells. They shoot you with them, and the other person will just get obliterated. And instead of them all just being dispelled by a single level 4 wizard on the other team, maybe they don't even get dispelled at all, and they just all just go off, right?
Yeah, it's such a huge difference from having a single caster that is dispelling with a +4 versus your +2 to cast. It's not just a 50% difference. It's larger than that on the 2 dice. It's a massive difference versus, nope, at most, they're getting a +2 to dispel. There are some cases where you can get a combo to get +3 to dispel, but those are very rare. They're not common, and for the most part, we're not seeing people really doubling down on that. So yes, suddenly now, though your bound spells, which Lizardmen have a lot of them, it's not that they hit harder than they did before, but you're going to get a lot more of them off. Perhaps more than double the amount that you were getting them off before. That's a huge difference. So again, while a lot of the times before people would just not take them because they were just so easy to dispel by that level 4 wizard with his buffs or whatever, I'd really encourage all the Lizardmen players out there, re-look at those bound spells or those units that are casting or using abilities with bound spells. They're way more effective and way more likely to go off than they ever were before.
So next up we have the Skink Priests. So again, because of the whole Magic lore casting bonus and dispel bonus nerf, being level 1 and level 2 is actually fine. And so you can just bring these guys. I think that, especially if you're not bringing a Slann, you might as well just bring at least one of these guys with either, like Glittering Robe, or you could just roll on some stuff on Battle Magic and see what you get. I think that's perfectly fine. They can also sometimes ride the monsters that have the bounce spells as well. And then you have a Dispeller who's also just riding on top of these things in your character slot. So that's also fine. I think that at the very least, I really think that people out there should not just drop all wizards and take none at all. I don't think that's the ideal play. Speaking as an Empire player who brings the Warrior Priests, and I just try rolling on my 50-50 shot all the time anyway, which is exactly what a lot of the spells are now. Just do it, because some of the time it goes off all the time, right?
Yep. It's exactly right. And Skink Priest, again, this is one of those before, like with the level 1 wizards, they just weren't viable, quite frankly, in the pre-patch update, because level 4s would just shut them all down entirely. And now, with the update, suddenly those level 1s and level 2s absolutely can compete. And the difference between a level 1 and level 4 now is +1 on the die roll. Absolutely, you're going to get so many. That's such a huge delta versus what it was before. And the Skink Priests are like the Goblin Priests. They're very cost effective because they are no melee capability whatsoever. So the points are cheaper on them than a wizard that is slightly more defense capabilities. So I think Skink Priests are great, and definitely Lizardmen players should look at them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying leave your Slann at home. I'm saying a Slann now has meaningful support from level 1s and level 2s. Also, just covering dispel range. Suddenly, I just have a level 1 over here. I put no points into him, but just putting him running around with some other unit is suddenly an 18-inch bubble where you can dispel that level 4 wizard or those bound items on the other side, because it's only a 1 pip difference. So
or the remains in place spells. If the other person has remains in place spells and you have no wizard, actually trying to get rid of them is almost impossible. So if I have my Dream Magic, or if I have my Casket of Souls doing lighted protection, and you have no wizard at all. That spell's just staying there all game, so enjoy that, right? And having no ability to get rid of remains in play is a big negative.
Yeah, so a lot of potential there, not just for, hey, I need to be able to cast 4 spells. Just being able to cast 1 spell fairly reliably. Hey, I take this level 1, he's going to get his spell off 3 to 4 times this game. That's amazing. And he might shut down something else once or twice a game where he had no shot of doing that before. So it's a big shakeup.
So next up is what I like to call the monster mash, which is where you just bring a ton of monsters. I think that Lizardmen can definitely do this. They don't necessarily have something that's as cost effective as the Necrosphinx and like that, but just a ton of halfway decent monsters, and you use multiple on the same unit. You have a cold one, Carnosaur guy, right? I'm sorry, I mean the old blood on a Carnosaur, right? And he can go in there and just mash people up. You definitely get a lot of attacks on those kind of characters. So if you can. If you want to take magic weapons or armor and stuff like that, put them on the Carnosaur. I don't necessarily think that they're on the same level as the dragon. They also don't fly, so they don't just get to ignore the rules of half the game. But
yeah, they're not.
Yeah, but if you bring them with the other monsters too, I think that that's a viable strategy as well. And maybe you take some of those skinks out of the list and you replace them with some of this kind of stuff. And I think that could be interesting.
Yep, because remember, while they're not on par with the dragon, Evan, there are less Chaos Lords on dragons with ogre blades now.
That's true.
So inherently, by the most dominant alpha predator that was in Old World, with the match play packet of 1.5 being knocked down a peg, that inherently lifts up things that were at mid tier or lower tier. So suddenly the value proposition of this monster is higher because there are less alpha predators that are going to be able to just take it out so easily.
All right, and then last up is the Cold One Riders. So again, at the very least, if people are playing with a rule similar to how we're doing it with our rule for stupidity, that you get to use your cold-blooded for the stupidity roll, putting your guy on a cold one and just joining some cold one riders in a bus, I think that that's just a massive number of attacks that's really good at dealing with things like infantry blocks that the other person might actually be bringing to the table now, whereas in the past that wasn't really a thing. And so if you want to say, okay, what do I do about all these dwarf warriors and all these high elf spearmen that are stuck in my way? Well, the cold one riders I think are a great little unit to do. I mean, it's like 5 attacks per each guy, 4 attacks per each guy before he casts any spells.
It's a lot.
If you do if you Fury of Cain, they go up to 6 attacks each on those. Just the 2 guys 2 from the guy on top and 2 from the cold one, and I like that. I've done it before where I had Demonic Vessel on my cold one knights for Dark Elves, and wow. I think one time I had the Cold One Knights. They were 6 wide. They had a Demonic Vessel casting them from the Sorceress, and I charged like 20 Empire State troops, and I did 27 unsaved wounds, and so they were just all dead by far. It's great.
I think to your point, it is interesting though. It is worth mentioning that while our Old World Legends Legacy FAQ, we allow you to use the cold-blooded rule for stupidity, and we're not the only community that does that. There are other communities out there that do that as well with how they handle the Legacy faction rules and such.
Yeah, it just seems like a no-brainer. Right?
But also at the same time, it is worth mentioning that stupidity is also more punishing than it ever was before. So it's both. We feel that there is more reason than ever before to field this unit because of its potential and what you're going to be facing on the battle. There are more targets, viable targets that you really want to take out in terms of that big brick of infantry is sitting on that objective, slamming into them with this very, very heavy, hard-hitting unit, whether it's the frontal attack or supporting something else, is more effective and more meaningful to what you'll see on the battlefield than before. At the same time, if you do fail that stupidity test, it is more punishing than it was before. So pros and cons.
True. Yeah, and just also the changes to challenges are huge for units like this, because it used to be if you put too many points in a single cavalry bus and somebody just lands a black work on Wyvern in front of you, you can charge it if you want to, and then you just lose because you get a mass overkilled on the combat res by the champion just dying, and then you did no damage and you run away. And now you can actually challenge that thing, and most of the time, even with just 1 rank, a banner, and a close order when the other guy doesn't have that, that's enough points to win based the other guy because he doesn't get the max combat res from overkilling you anymore. And so
that's right.
Yeah, if you just and Cold War Riders can have drilled, so you can go in there and say, oh, you know what? Actually, I need to go narrower. Which I would, by the way, if you have drilled in a cavalry unit, you should always buy that. It's insane how good that is. It's nuts.
In particular in cavalry. But yeah, if you have that combo, so which again, I'd encourage you to take more than just that brick of 5 so that you can lose 1 or 2 along the way and still get your 10,
probably like
strength
7
plus.
to
So
10.
So 7 to 10 is really the sweet spot based upon the list that you're building, and exactly right. So even like, all right, I sacrificed my champion to that war boss or wyvern or dragon lord or guy or whatever, okay, he's going to score 2, maybe 3, in total, and that will be it, right? And if you have your banner plus your rank, that's 2. I'd encourage you to also look at things like the war banner, 25 points. It's it gives you that extra 1+1 combat res. Plus you have the enclosed order. Suddenly, like, okay, yeah, they ate up my champion, but I'm going to auto win the combat, right? It makes a huge difference of what are the results are, and you can stand your ground. And suddenly, it's not just an auto decision for the person on the other side.
All right. So that's it for the Lizardmen, all you lizard players out there. Lizard.
Yeah, so if you have any other things that really stood out to you in terms of the 1.5 update that affected the Lizardmen, please do post in the comments, join our Discord, and let us know as always. Evan, any last closing words, sir?
Stay lizard-dairy.
All right, we'll see you next time.